This material is made available to you by or on behalf of the University of Melbourne under Section 113P of the Copyright Act 1968. It may be subject to copyright. For more information, visit the University Copyright website.
Well, hello again and welcome to another session. This is session 10 of World of Engineering Management. It's good to be here again, and I wanted to thank you very much for all your efforts on the case study and the strategy frameworks. I thought it was an exercise well worth doing, and I was really pleased at the level of engagement from students, even though we're working in a virtual world. It was really nice to see. So we have another case study coming up in the final session next week, and I was hoping that we could engage in a similar way because we would normally be doing a workshop in the classroom. But anyway, this week I've divided the lecture into two parts again. So we're going to be looking at a variety of topics. Remember, this is a buffet subject and we can't always we can't always touch on everything in depth, but I'm going to try and give you as much of a, an overview of some of these business and management and innovation topics as I possibly can in such a short period of time. So today we're looking at teams and teamwork, we're looking at conflict and negotiation, and we're continuing to look at innovation from a little bit of a more Australian perspective, but it's based on my research and some theories and notions about innovation that I think are valuable to share. So let me just start by sharing my screen with you, and I'll get the weekly lecture slides up. Here we go. Let's start from the beginning. Okay, just bear with me. Oops, bear with me for a second. There we are. I hope you're keeping well. Isolation is not exciting at all, but I hope that that things are going well for you all. All right, here's session 10, Innovation, Teamwork, Conflict Management, and Negotiation. So lots of topics today. Let me first begin by just reminding you about the individual assignment, because by now I suppose you are thinking about this. Given that we had the strategy activity last week, I don't think you'll be able to really do your individual assignment until we have done the task with the case study next week, because there are questions about innovation, which is something we're looking at in depth next week. So just a reminder that the individual assignment is due on the 7th of June, 11:59 p.m. Don't wait till the very last minute, because if too many people are trying to send their assignments in at 11:55, the system might crash on you. So rather than have troubles with a late submission, think ahead and manage your time efficiently. There is a link on the Canvas, so on the Canvas site, so just submit through that particular submission link. The maximum is 1,000 words. What I'm looking for is I want a very, I want a comprehensive but concise argument from you. I want something that is a tightly written piece of work. It is much easier to write 2,000 words and say very little. It is much harder to, to say something succinctly, concise, to the point, that covers a lot of ground in 1,000 words. And of course, in terms of business communication, we want to maximize the effectiveness of our communications at all times, whether we're talking about communicating through reports or on social media or, on Zoom, face-to-face, but we want to make sure that, that we are very effective as possible in our communications. So that's one reason why I'm keeping the words down. Please note that I am not expecting you to do any research outside of the Intel case, and your report should only be, your paper should only be concerned with Intel up to 2014. So don't talk about Intel after 2014. It will not gain you any points. In fact, you'll have points deducted. This is a hypothetical where you're developing your own strategy for Intel going forward based on applying the value-based framework, the B-C framework, to the Intel case. That's all you're doing. So when I say referencing, referencing should only apply to the Intel case. So at the end, you include a couple of references. One is the Intel case, and one is a reference to the B-C framework that you're using. That's it. I will not be impressed with more references. I just want you to be aware that when we write business reports, there are referencing conventions that you may not be familiar with because you're studying in engineering. So I don't mind what referencing convention you use for your couple of references, but just make sure that they're consistent. So again, no outside research on Intel is required. It won't impress me if you do so. It's only going to take away from the power of your argument, because the argument in your paper should only concern Intel up to 2014. There's more detailed information under assessment, so if you want to go and have a look at the details there, feel free to do so. All right, so today, this first part, I'm just going to talk about teams, conflict management, and negotiation. Second part, we'll be looking at innovation once more. So there are various definitions of teams. We all work in teams, you know, whether we're in a class like this, or whether we're on the job, whether we're in academics, whether we're in business or engineering. Teams are the way in which we tend to structure our work these days. And so, you know, a team is a unit of two or more people who have various skills and capabilities that are complementary so that they suit each other and they work together and bring different strengths to that unit of people. They have a common purpose, and they share common performance goals. They have a certain type of working together. These might be the conventions of working in a particular organization or organizational culture, and they are mutually accountable as a unit of people, as a team of people, for achieving those goals. So we tend to distinguish between teams and groups. Groups of people might be those who report to a supervisor or a manager, but normally groups are ones that come together once in a while. They could be like committees or something like that. A team is a working group that are there working all the time together, and so that team will make, even if it's in agile, flexible environments, you might bring a team of people together, create that team, and they work through on a project. When that project's over, they're disbanded, and then they might have to go and work with other teams. We create new teams for new projects. But working groups are not people that are working in those groups solely, exclusively, and at all times. So the best example I can give you is someone who is working on a committee. They come together, yes, they're a group, but I wouldn't call them a team. So we tend to talk, and maybe some of you are familiar with the kinds of theories around teams and team building, because it is of interest to lots of people in business. How do we maximize the efficiency and effectiveness of our teams? And so there's been quite a bit of attention paid to various theories. The wisdom of teams here from Katzenbach and Smith is one way of looking at how teams actually grow and how this impacts their performance over time. So once you have a group of people starting to come together, you will probably find that there is kind of a dip in their performance as they get to know each other, and as they try to sort out how they're actually going to come together as a team, as they sort out what their goals are that they need to achieve, what objectives have to be achieved and understood first before you can get on the pathway to achieving them. But you can see there, it sort of bottoms out at the beginning. beginning. There's maybe some conflict as people get to know each other, and maybe there's a little bit of clash of personalities, perhaps. This may have happened to you. I know it certainly happened to me working in team environments over the years. Then suddenly you start to work on an upswing where you can finally see the potential of the team as they are kind of settling down. And the performance, productivity, and so on tends to go up. And once you get to that stage, you can see how performance is increasing to the point where you go from a potential team to a real team. And then once you have the team is kind of firing and working well together, that's when you start to get into that capacity for high performance. And this is what we all want to achieve in business, in academics, in any kind of team environment. Sports, look at all the, I think this applies to many different contexts, but we all seek to achieve the high performance team because those are the teams that they achieve the highest productivity and performance, but they're also, as a team, those individual members are the happiest, most motivated, and most engaged of, any people that have to work in team environments. Now, this is just a little bit of a look at contrast and compare about teams and groups. And we tend to find that in teams, often we encourage the leadership role to be rotated in teams, whereas in groups, you probably have a head of a committee or something like that. The team probably works under a specific team vision or purpose. That could be the project and goals that they are working on a particular project. But with a group such as a committee, they would have the same purpose for the group and the organization, because the committee has been likely struck up to support the strategy of the organization. Team meetings can often be they are more regular, they are full of open-ended discussions, they don't have set start and finish times, whereas group meetings do. They're run efficiently, they have agendas and minutes are taken and so on. That doesn't happen in a team environment. Some of the other things, I won't go through it, you can read yourselves, but the group entities, their effectiveness is measured on the basis of individual performance, on the seniority of the people in the group or the job classifications involved. But in a team environment, the effectiveness of the team is measured by assessing the collective performance, the entire output of the team, and that is the way that they measure effectiveness. So in many team environments, we really don't want to see free riders, people who are not contributing to the team environment, because that causes a lot of unhappiness in the other team members, and it causes dysfunction in a team and so on. Sometimes in some business team environments, we see that individual skills and capabilities are also monitored, and sometimes individual bonuses as well as team bonuses are paid in those kinds of bonus environments. All right, let's move on. We have different types of teams. Here's some examples. In the workplace, you might see functional teams. Sometimes we call them quality circles or work teams. You normally have a manager who oversees a team of this nature, and then his or her subordinates are part of that formal chain of command. That manager checks in. This would not be a team leader. This would be the manager to whom the entire team reports. You would have discussions with the manager on how well you're tracking on your performance objectives and goals and so on. But mostly the team, the team will be working together as a team without the manager breathing down their neck all the time. So they would be working on various aspects of the job environment. Quality circles I've included here because I've done a lot of work over the years with Toyota, and they have these quality circles which really are based on the Japanese philosophy of continuous improvement. We see quality circles in many kinds of organizations. They might not even be called that, but the the continuous improvement process is deeply embedded in things like team structures and team units, so that teams discuss means by which they can continuously improve things that they're doing for the greater benefit of everyone in the organization. Okay, now we might see also something called a cross-functional team operating in business environments, and these are teams that focus on problem solving a lot of the time. What they do is they bring together, because of the nature of the term cross-functional, they bring a lot of people with different backgrounds, different skills, capabilities, and expertise together, and they usually are struck together temporarily. They are there to solve particular issues and problems, or to take on a special project. And we do see a lot of in the agile environment, for example, that sort of thing is happening quite frequently. You also have management teams where groups of managers come together, not as committees, but as teams that work regularly, and they coordinate work teams across the organization. So you might run into these, if you're in the workplace at the moment, but certainly in your future career. Teams are considered to be very valuable in work settings because, first of all, there's a strong feeling. We wouldn't work in these team structures so much if we didn't feel that there was a certain amount of competitive advantage. A lot of competitive advantage can come from it, and that will then lend itself to very strong organizational performance. And so we look at things like indicators of effectiveness, such as improved productivity, better work quality. This is because people come together, and there's a feeling that the sum of the parts is the sum of the parts is greater than each of the individual strengths that each person brings into the team. So the whole team can bring more because it is a collaboration of people, and they're bringing all of these different skills, capabilities, and so on into the team environment. It also is considered a means by which we can better share knowledge, so that we can create new forms of knowledge by people bringing their individual knowledge to bear in a team environment, and then creating new knowledge from combining those individual bits of knowledge to create knowledge within the group. But the focus is on the new knowledge, which gives you the value. It also team environments are seen to enhance motivation and job satisfaction in employees, because you're working with others. You bond with those people in your team. It's more satisfying for many people to work side by side with others with a common goal in mind, rather than working individually. That's a very lonely life, and I guess we're experiencing that working alone business at the moment, and it's sometimes hard to think of yourself as a bigger team when you're all alone and doing your study, or doing your lectures, whatever it might be. But being part of the team, it gives you I think a greater sense of, I'm not the only one here, and there are, there's more, I think, more enjoyment and more satisfaction that comes from a job well done when you've done it as a team. And, I can look back in history and say, well, we all know about Henry Ford and his assembly line, because that was absolutely a huge innovation in those days to build cars on an assembly line, and then that spread into factories, manufacturing everywhere. But we don't have the kind of assembly line now in automotive manufacturing that they did in Henry Ford's time. We now see teams of people taking responsibility for the manufacture of an entire car. In Henry Ford's day, your job would be an individual one on the assembly line, maybe putting a wheel on or putting a door on or something like that, and you did that. You did that all the time. That was your job. It must have been terribly boring and I think kind of like deadening in a way. But in modern car manufacture, teams put together and finish off the car and drive it off the assembly line. And there's a great deal of satisfaction among team members to see the finished product, because that was something on the early assembly lines you never saw, and you never connected with it. You never connected with anybody else on the assembly line. So these are some of the things that over time have compelled us to introduce team structures into work environments. Well, here are some other reasons why we value teams. I think that there are less opportunities for mistakes to happen when you have a bunch of people working together. I mentioned productivity and efficiency before, but one thing that sometimes we don't think about so much is that when people are unhappy at work, they tend to take more sick time. They also tend to walk out on the job. They quit. And there's a cost involved in people down on sick time, but there's also a cost involved in having to recruit and train and bring in new people when there's a high turnover rate because people are unhappy. And so, just because of that, we seem to see that in team environments, there's less of that absenteeism and turnover, and therefore less cost there. Sometimes because teams focus on things like quality improvement, continuous improvement, we see, the lowering of waste, because continuous improvement does involve looking at ways in which you can be more lean, say in your manufacturing, if you're a manufacturer, or how can we waste less, whether it's, emissions or there's always a way to look at lowering waste. And if you're working individually, you're not interested. But if it's something that the team is engaged to do, I think you'll get some great ideas. And we do see a lot more potential for innovation ideas. Remember, innovation is not just radical light bulb moments, it's also continuous improvement. It's about 70% of innovation is small step, incremental innovation. So I think teams are a very good vehicle for generating innovation rather than expecting individuals to do it. It's just not going to happen at the same pace or, to the same amount. And again, I think it's that sense of, the social well-being, collaboration, and so on, that you get more energy from working with a group of people. For the organization, there's a lot more potential for innovation, for creativity that you get from brainstorming with a group of people who might have different backgrounds to you. I know personally that if I hadn't been going to computer clubs twice a week and engaging with people like engineers, I was more from the IT side, and but I did build my own circuit boards and things like that. So I had a very eclectic background. It was very nice to meet other people who gave me ideas or suggestions to say, wow, why don't you put all of these things together? You might then have a keyboard prototype that you can use with the disabled. So those people were invaluable to me when I was trying to put together my ideas for creating these keyboards for the disabled to hook into microcomputers in the early days. So there are many things can be said about, the power of collaboration that you get through teams. There are also, sadly, situations where we have, team dysfunction. And I think it's interesting to look at, the costs of weak teams, and then especially look at how do we build effective teams? How do we build high performance teams? And how do we make people happy working in their teams? So, there's lots of situations where teams are dysfunctional. If there's a lack of trust within the team, and this could happen for many reasons, you will not have people willing to share their ideas or to take a risk, by speaking out or anything. There are also sometimes team members who are free riders, what we call free riders. They don't want to contribute. They don't contribute. They try and skirt the work as much as they can. they are not fully involved or engaged in their work. There may be many reasons for that, but you probably all had experiences of that, whether in a work environment or in a university environment, because I know at university we ask you to work in teams all the time. So you may have had great experiences or not so great experiences or something in between. But again, these things happen in real life. And one of the things that I think can help us, if we know what some of the causes are, and if we know better how to deal with these things, then maybe we can mitigate some of the negative effects of, dysfunctional or weak teams. Sometimes it's because people are afraid of, an overbearing team leader or a manager who is overseeing the team who lacks good managerial skills. It may be that there are just too many meetings and not enough time to get on with the job. There are many different, issues that can occur. Now, there are many organizations that spend a great deal of time doing personality tests and the like. There are various tools and instruments that we can use to get people to actually look into people's personality and preferences, and what sort of team member would they be, what would their preferred team role be. It's quite deadly if you put a team together and you've got 2 or 3 people who think they should be the team leader all the time. That makes it very difficult. You're going to have fights all the time. They're just going to argue with each other, and it's at the expense of the others who just want to get on with the job. So, there might be some sensibility around putting teams together in this manner, because team dysfunction costs the organization a lot of time and money and angst for people who have to work in a bad environment. So many organizations, and there's a lot of debate about what is the optimal team size, and I think that depends largely on the type of business operation, what kind of industry sector, what kind of what kind of tasks are you expecting, or outputs are you expecting from the teams? So there is no one, optimal number of people in a team. But a lot of organizations spend a lot of time thinking about what is, the optimal size. I think there's general agreement that really big teams, they're not very effective. In some contexts, a team of 2 or 3 is great. In others, it's 6 or 7. But again, that depends on the business and the context of the industry setting. There are many reasons why performance isn't achieved sufficiently in teams. Sometimes the goals and the objectives are not clear, and so the team doesn't really know, what they're trying to achieve. So if the goals are clear, that really helps teams to rally and to move towards meeting those objectives. Team design can be an issue. If you have got, for example, too many leaders, that's not going to be a good thing. If you have a leader who doesn't express clearly the expectations, and that might be setting the tone, building the culture within the team, communicating the performance objectives, that is a problem as well. Sometimes things can get out of hand. People disagree about the way forward, and we find that they're unable to, leaders sometimes are not able to manage that conflict. That can be a problem. Sometimes a team, we find that team members are duplicating work, mainly because there's someone not checking progress and that sort of thing. So that can also lead to some situations where you're losing time and cost through duplication of work or that sort of thing. But I think communication is a very important aspect of a high performance team. You need to ensure that the communication is effective, and the communication takes place in, through several different vehicles or opportunities for communication, and not, that there is the opportunity at all times for information sharing. I've found because my PhD is in knowledge management and innovation, I found that, communication is so important to all of these processes, but that you've got to, no matter what kind of team you're working with, team structure, it's important to provide multiple means of communication. So, it's fine to communicate via, virtual means, but it's also very important to offer face-to-face opportunities, especially for brainstorming, lateral thinking, creativity, that sort of workshopping things. That's really important, and you might feel that we've missed out on that a little bit this semester. I certainly do, but I do think that communicating using various vehicles for communication really does make a difference in terms of building team spirit. I'll never forget that one of the businesses I visited, it was a startup business, and his business plan in this environmental services business, it was based on the Mornington Peninsula here in Australia. He had a business plan and funding for 3 years, and then the business was to be, self-sufficient within that 3-year period, which is quite common in a startup business model. And he made sure that every Friday afternoon, tools were down at 1 o'clock, and everybody would move into the, the big shared lunchroom that they had, and they would have a shared lunch, often, something that they ordered in, and then they would do various activities in the afternoon that were not work related at all, things like playing board games. They invited me to come and join them a couple of times. It was marvelous to see, because it was amazing that even though they were playing various board games, or they were playing, things like Pictionary or charades or any of those things, that they actually spent so much time talking about work without realizing it. It was a great way for them to bond and to learn about what the others had each been doing over the course of the week. And it was a fabulous way to build the entire team. It was a small company. I think we were talking about maybe a dozen people. But it was an amazing way to, to build the team. And then later in the afternoon, partners and families were invited to come and join the team. And around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, everyone would be gone by 5. But it was such a great team building, and I think an amazing way to add value for very little cost, because even though it sounds like, oh, no work got done, I think that engagement and motivation is such an important part of productivity. So it's the best case I can share with you of a company that really did it well. And he went on to sell the company once it was up and running. It was very successful, and he went on to sell that company. And now he started a new thing, but it's a different type of environmental service monitoring. But he now has global partners, and they're working on sites in Australia, the UK, and in Asia somewhere. So it's very nice to tell a success story like that. Okay. So Katzenbach and Smith, we've looked at their, their model of team effectiveness. They're interested in building high-performance teams. LaFasto and Larson, another model of team effectiveness, they're looking at how can we best design teams, and how can we ensure that the leadership of teams is such that we maximize performance. And so there's a lot of interest in how teams develop, and why we should be concerned about the various stages that teams go through, because they inevitably do as they're being, struck up. And how do we manage team conflict, which is the second part that I'm going to be talking about. So this is from Katzenbach and Smith. You can see, there are many things that result in performance, at the top of the triangle here. You have various skills that people bring to the team. So obviously the strength of the skills in the individuals and collectively in the team will make a difference to your performance at the top. In terms of accountability, this is about the goals. And, accountability, everybody should have some personal accountability, but there's also that sense that we're all responsible for the, achievement of objectives. So we want to make sure that, as we're moving towards the towards performance, high performance teams, we want to make sure everybody understands that there are some things for which you're individually accountable, but at the end of the day, the whole team is accountable for achieving their goals and objectives. And at the bottom here, we want to we want to build commitment. So that is about engagement and motivation and all that stuff. We also have to understand as team members, there is a collective work product that has to be achieved in order to say that we've met our objectives. And we also, I think, need to ensure that people have a chance for personal growth as they are working in a team, and that might be to change roles for people so they're not playing the same role in a team all the time. Rotate the roles. That might make it interesting for people. Building leadership skills in people who aren't necessarily or haven't necessarily been or had the opportunity to be a team leader. This is how we learn and grow. If we're doing the same thing every day, like that assembly line in Henry Ford's car manufacturing, you don't learn anything, you don't grow, and you kind of, I think, become a bit of a zombie. So you need to be thinking about all of these things in order to end up with a high performance team. So here are some of those elements I've just talked about. We have various things that should be going on in teams, like the team members with problem solving, openness, supportiveness, a positive personal style. These are attributes that can be developed in a healthy organizational culture and climate, and that can be introduced through induction when you bring new people into an organization and a team. You need to work on making sure that team relationships are constructive and that they're positive, and that's often based on good communication. It's not easy to give feedback, especially when someone is not doing a really great job. It's easy to praise someone. It's harder to give constructive criticism, but that is something that's a real, it's a real talent that is sometimes managers are lacking. Sometimes we lack it as individuals too. So, we want to make sure that we provide a great communication platform and a climate of trust within the team, so people are not afraid to speak out, and that they're not afraid to get cut down by someone who's nasty or doesn't know how to communicate constructively and effectively. And that's what I mean there by an organizational environment. So that's from LaFasto and Larson. Okay, so we need to design our teams, in the right way for the right context, and I've mentioned that previously. So, for some organizations, the smaller the better. 2, 3 people in a team maximum. Depends on what their objectives are. It depends on what the industry is. Depends on what the project is, what the task at hand is all about. We want to, in larger teams, make sure that we have a range of people who can bring different talents and skills to the team. We also want to make sure that we have, we're looking at diversity now. Diversity will probably be around skills and backgrounds, because different people from different backgrounds will see things in a different way that can contribute. When you've got people from many different diverse areas coming together, you'll start to get that mix of opportunities for creativity, for doing things in a different way. That's when I think you have a better chance to establish innovative ways forward. I also think that if you have too much diversity, that can also be very, very taxing on people, because you might end up with a lack of agreement, or certainly agreement on the way forward. So there should be some consideration of diversity, not just cultural diversity and people from diverse areas of study and diverse work backgrounds and things like that. But gender diversity is also, I think we're seeing this more and more design teams and this sort of thing in high-tech businesses and engineering and so on. We're seeing this as much more of an impetus to have that balance of diversity across teams now. And so you have various ways in which we do that. Now, this is quite a famous framework of team development that's still used a great deal in business, in academics. Companies pay a lot of money to try to put together effective teams. And how do they choose the team members that go in there? How do they decide on the makeup of the team and so on? But one thing that everybody understands, because you probably have heard of this Tuckman model before, 1965. This is a classic. It's still for some people it's the only model that they can talk about off the top of their head. It's pretty easy to remember these 5 stages, but the Tuckman model is still widely respected, so this is why we call it a classic in business. But what they say is that there are 5 stages in team development, and the first one is forming, where it's a getting to know you phase. There's a high level of uncertainty because people aren't familiar with the performance objectives and so on for the team. So it's really about the very beginnings where people first come together. The storming phase is where, as with the other model, there's sort of a dip in performance of the team at the very beginning when a team comes together. Well, this is probably due to, because they call it the storming phase, which is conflict, disagreement. Each member needs to have their say because they might not all agree on the way forward, or they might be from different backgrounds and they obviously think their way is the best way, but they have to come to some agreement. There's going to be a storming phase where there is some conflict. So this should be mitigated by a good leader is able to drive that process, but you have to let people go in the early stages about getting to know one another and getting through this conflict stage. If they can achieve that, then there comes another stage, which is the norming stage, where they start to, all right, respect each other's opinions. Sometimes some people agree to disagree, but they move on because they see the need for the, trying to achieve the greater good through meeting those performance objectives. And after that happens, again, the leader should be monitoring this sort of progressive development in the team. After that kind of piece has been achieved, then you get to the stage where it's called the performing stage. This is when the team starts to hum. You start to get that high performance element going in the team, and people are really engaged. People are really working on problem solving, task accomplishment, collaborating with one another, and getting a real sense of achievement from each other. Everybody has got their place and everybody knows their tasks, and there is nothing like a feeling of working with a group of people when you're really working together. So that's what the performing stage is. Now, teams don't stay together forever. So, there's that adjourning phase, which is often a very sad stage for many high performance teams, because they have to be struck down and allocated elsewhere on different projects and so on. We see this all the time in project-based team formations. And so it's an important thing in the adjournment stage to have some closure, to celebrate the team wins and the great performance they've achieved. Often we do that with a little bit of a ritual, a bit of a ceremony and so on, to say, hey, we really did well and let's stay in touch. Networks are very important in this modern world, so it's important to keep together. And it also, you may see those people again another day when you're put together in another team. Who knows? But those are the classic stages of Tuckman's model there. And you can see here, that again, you have team performance at the beginning. You see this in most of the models. They always have this dip here where it takes a while for the uncertainty and so on, possible conflict to take place before they actually become tight as a team. And then when you move into this, in order to get it moving towards the high performance culture, you probably need, the intervention, the quiet intervention, the subtle intervention of a good team leader can help them to get on their journey towards becoming a more tightly formed team. And once that happens, as they progress into levels of higher performance, they can become self-management, a good self-managing, that a good leader knows when to step back and let them manage themselves and get on with the job. It's just like in a conventional workplace, a good manager is the one who delegates work to teams and trusts them to get the job done. Many managers don't like to do that because they think they have to be there micromanaging and interfering at every step of the way. And I think in modern team environments, we're all smart people. We don't need that kind of micromanagement. So I think all of these, all of these frameworks are interesting in giving us some insight into why do things go well, why do things go wrong in teams. I mean, teams are here to stay for a while. I think we're not going to be, ditching team environments in any sense in the near future or the longer future, I think. So, there's various things you can do to build team performance, and some of it is setting, rules of behavior or just expectations, I think is a better word. You say, okay, a leader can help to guide this, or a manager to guide, and that's set within the bounds of the corporate, the organizational culture. This is the way we do things here. These are the expectations of the team, how we expect you to work and so on. And we have some rules up the game. And I think it's very good to set those rules, because I do know that many times in work and also in academic settings, I've seen teams that don't discuss this at all. When things go wrong, 3-4 weeks into a semester, for example, with a student group, none of this conversation has happened. So when it goes wrong, everything just falls apart. It's sad to see. So there are things that managers and leaders of teams can do to, set the scene and help that initial dip become less of a dip than a real big trench that it takes a long time to crawl out of. So, we want to remind the team that we have these sets of goals that we need to achieve. We need to communicate effectively. We need to challenge the group. You can monitor without micromanaging. You can spend a lot of good time together. There's nothing better than a team leader who rolls up his or her sleeves and works side by side with the team. That earns them respect, rather than, flitting around and lording it over everybody. This is not modern leadership, good leadership practice. So, we want to get that feeling of earning respect by working side by side. And you also need to really be careful about communication. Positive feedback, very important. Recognizing and rewarding people for the work they do is also very important. And many organizations spend a lot of time, thinking about what is the best way to reward performance. Are people happy to be recognized only, or do they actually want to work? Do they need to work for bonuses, such as cash bonuses? Some people will work enormously hard and will work enormously fast in order to achieve a cash bonus, for example. If that's what motivates them, fine, because they'll be productive. For other people, it's more about being thanked for a job well done. You have to understand what people, what engages people, what motivates them. So it's well worth thinking about, and you only learn that through communicating with them. Okay, so here are key takeaways on teamwork. Oh, it's a wild buffet ride, isn't it, this subject? And we're down to 5 weeks instead of 6. So I could spend a whole semester talking about business frameworks and different aspects of business. But it is what it is. So here we go. Obviously, team frameworks and team structures are here to stay. And there are many reasons why we do this. They they provide a lot of advantages in the workplace. And there's a lot of different things that need to be thought about in terms of achieving team effectiveness. And we need to, as managers and leaders, we need to think about this. But I think we also, as team members, we need to also, look at the opportunities that we might be afforded for self-awareness and personal growth in a team environment. You don't want to end up your whole career working the same kind of role in a team, because that's almost like being back on Henry Ford's production line. So, you need to think about, being an effective team member, but also the way in which you can grow personally, in a team environment. And to be honest, if you have a strong team leader, there's much you can learn from them. But team leaders, they also need to be respectful of the other people in the team. And this, I think, is characterized, a good team leader is characterized by some of those more modern forms of leadership that they display, like, more servant or authentic types of leadership. They're the ones that are respected, because at the end of the day, they work with, with the team, and it gives a strong sense that they are part of the team rather than someone who's just guiding the team. But team performance is something that it's hard. It's not easy to achieve. But if you don't look at a variety of factors, it's virtually impossible to achieve. So I think there's a real art in terms of achieving better forms of team performance. I've been in the past engaged in some longer term consultancies to try to build team performance in critical, organization, where it has been critical for that team to work effectively. Sometimes it's been after there's been 2 or 3 restructures of the organization and people are completely demotivated. It has been really, it's been very interesting, because I have realized how difficult it is and how much attention you need to pay to building a high performance team. It just doesn't happen like magic. So it's a fascinating area, and one in which I think we need to think more about, because we're all working in teams. So the more we think about these things, and the more we maybe stretch ourselves a little bit as managers, leaders, or team members, I think the more effective our teams can become. Wow. Okay. Now we're talking about conflict. Again, a real quick drive through conflict. I hope we don't crash like this. Conflict is something that happens all the time. It happens in our personal life. It happens in our work life. It is not something that you can avoid, although there are lots of people who would like to avoid conflict at all costs. There are different types of conflict in the workplace. Now, one of them is what we call task conflict. It is where people disagree about the nature of the task and how to achieve a goal. How do we get this done? So, there are ways in which we can deal with task conflict. The other type of conflict is relationship conflict. This is where there is a personality clash between 2 people or more people in a team. I think in terms of mitigating conflict, of dealing with conflict, a team leader really needs to be aware of these things and really needs to take some personal responsibility for dealing with conflict in the workplace situation. So let's look at a few, sources of conflict. Obviously, you can have a clash of cultures within a team, and what I mean by that is it could be, a clash of values. It could be a clash of opinion. It could be a clash of beliefs. Now, in modern teams, we might see that there are people that come from, all over the world that come together in a team. They might have different ways of doing things. So it could be cultural values. It could also be different beliefs about the way forward. It could also be, I'm trying to think of a great, I've seen some great things recently about design teams. And it's very surprising to me how, a group of male and female design engineers, might come together, and they're, often, in graduate courses in engineering, they're asked to design some hypothetical computer and so on. And it's very interesting to see how the different genders have different opinions and beliefs about what that ideal computer should look like. So if it's a tangible product, or if it's a computer, like a software product or something like that, an app. There are considerable differences between males and females about what it should look like and how it should actually, run, what sort of goals are they trying to achieve and how they achieve them. So that it's not just a gender divide, it can be a cultural divide. And, you really have to think a lot on a design team about not just what's going on in the design team, but who are your customers. So it's possibly very interesting to be listening to people who say, okay, roughly 50% of the population is female. Maybe we should be listening to that 50% of the team, the design team, with their ideas about how an app should look and feel and interact with you. But similarly, where are your customer bases? So, people from different cultures to your own, if your customer, the market for your particular products and services is in a different cultural space to yours and in different parts of the globe, you should really be taking heed of what those people have to say on your team. Because, if you're not reacting to, to your market and to your customers, then you don't have a product or a service to sell. So it's a really interesting thing. There's sometimes disagreement about goals and objectives and how to meet them. There are enormous problems in teams with communication. I think of all things that I would like to convey to engineering students about leadership as they go forward, especially if they wish to have a forward career path, that involves moving up in the career ladder. Communication is key. And communication is complex, in so much as about 70% of our communication patterns are silent. They're just unspoken. We read so much, which is why face-to-face and visual communication is really important, because we read each other's body language and so on. There's so much communicated in that way. And as human beings, we are constantly judging other people simply by their unspoken behavior. And so that raises a lot of issues around communication. Now, the other element of communication is, obviously there are different vehicles for communication. There's paper-based communication, there is face-to-face, there is virtual, there's one-on-one, there's one-to-group. There's many different ways in which we can communicate. There's ways in which to praise people, and there's ways in which to give them constructive feedback, that is a real challenge for a lot of people. These things are not easy. So communication is a very important skill to be working on to develop, for the future. Communication skills are also evident in things like job interviews and so on. Without effective communication skills, you probably won't get very far on that career path. So it's something that, there are many things that you need to be mindful of in terms of developing self-awareness and business-oriented skills. But communication is a real key element, and it opens the door for some of those other skills to develop more rapidly too. You need to bear in mind that, when we have everything is moving so fast in this world, and so in fast changing workplaces, there's a lot of pressure to meet deadlines, and there's a lot of pressure to just especially in things like agile and flexible workplaces like that. There is the potential for a great deal of conflict to happen because people are working under very stressful conditions. And then there's also the issue about resources. Scarce resources means that people are put under more, pressure when they have to compete for, resources that are not readily available. Now, people always talk about whether conflict is all bad. I think, my view on this is that, you know, if we were not stressed at all, if we had no stress, then none of us would probably get out of bed every day. So I think that it's good to have a little bit of stress to drive you, but if you have too much stress in your work environment, then it's going to be debilitating. So, it's good to have some stress, and conflict can be good if it's handled well, and when, if it's communicated in a constructive way. That is where we see a exchange of ideas and opinions, where we can actually brainstorm and come to some conclusion, where we create different ways of doing things from maybe different disparate ways, that have been brought to the table, but we create a new approach or new knowledge from existing ways and means. That leads to greater productivity. It's bad when people, are unable to engage in any kind of disagreement because they're afraid of conflict. And so I've seen teams where they're all, usually these teams are all very similar in their background and way of thinking. So they don't want to have a conflict. So they just simply say, yes, this is the best way forward. Now, this is what we call groupthink, because everybody in the group thinks the same. And this is something we'd like to avoid in team environments these days, because it means there is no capacity for lateral thinking or creativity, because everybody's going to come up with the same, solution to a problem. When conflict is based on personal differences, this is when it's really ugly, and this is when we don't want, when we don't want to see that happening. But again, it's the team leader's task to find the right balance between, healthy conflict and encouraging cooperation. And sometimes you have to actually step in and mitigate in situations where there's a conflict. And this is the mark of a clever leader who has what we call emotional intelligence. Okay, so we see here, something in the middle ground is about right. We don't, your performance goes way down if you have high amounts of conflict, obviously. If it's too low, then this is groupthink here. This is where there's personal differences and personal conflict. So very destructive in terms of productivity. And this is just another way of looking at various ways in which you can approach handling of conflict. You've got here on this axis the unassertive approach to the assertive approach. When it's too assertive, you become very competitive, and dominant. You can see that there's a collaborative way here where, again, it's an integrative approach. Over here on uncooperative, this is the avoidance issue. This would be like a free rider in a team, I reckon. And, here, there is, this is really on this axis, the party's desire to satisfy another's concern. If you become too cooperative, you're just laying down and appeasing, all the time. So it's kind of an interesting situation here. There's a me and them. Here's a, collaborative integration. That is a win-win situation. If you can achieve a cooperative and assertive, that means everybody's working together and they achieve a win-win situation as a result. Okay, just another one of another way of looking at this. So, in terms of trust and loyalty, and on a productivity axis here, if you withdraw and avoid, like the free riders, well, you're not going to have any productivity. It's going to be the lowest. And when you start to accommodate, okay, that's fine, but you're still not working, fully engaged with the team. When you start to make compromises, okay, that's fine. I think you're engaging a little bit more, but what we really want to do, still at the compromise level, is someone is still saying, no, it's my way or the highway, and you say, okay, well, you can have your way this time. But when we get to this stage of true collaboration, this is when you know, we're all working together, we're all collaborating. Maybe we have all agreed through a process of, you know, conflict and discussion, healthy conflict and discussion to, you know, to collaborate. That's where you get the highest level of productivity. This is no different to what we've seen in the other slides and so on. But when we have this sort of dominating approach happening, people just give up. They just say this is it. And this is probably when you've got personal differences, a lot of fighting that is based on personality clash, or a very poor leader or manager, you know, again, trying to push at you with in using their power in a very bad way. The level of tension is such, nothing will happen and you've lost all your productivity. So in terms of key takeaways for the conflict, sometimes it can be constructive. I do notice that, you know, some cultures, I've lived in many places around the world, and some cultures, conflict is not something that is enjoyed. There are some, you know, there are some cultures where conflict is much more the norm, and people are more comfortable with it. If you look into the mad world of Mr. Donald Trump, if you watch him, I think he welcomes conflict. I think he thrives on it, and he gives back as much as he gets in terms of criticism and everything. He is a very, very strange person in that regard, but I think it's also very much an American kind of, you know, Canadians are, I was born in Canada, so Canadians are horrified for the most part by his behavior, because Canadians are not like that, and they are, I think, almost embarrassed to live so close to the American border, because Canadians are very quick to say, if you say, what part of America are you from? Because a lot of people do ask me that with my accent. Many Canadians get wild about that. They get so annoyed because they say, oh, I'm a Canadian, I'm not an American. And so I think, you know, it's quite something, but some cultures are just not as comfortable with conflict. And I think if you want to be a successful leader or manager in some of those cultures, you need to understand that, and to, you know, be aware in your dealings that you cannot simply just come in and impose your own sorts of values from your own culture into a culture like that. It takes a lot of fine tuning, and it's also something that if you come from a different culture and you're expected to work in a team where you're unfamiliar with, you know, or you're uncomfortable with conflict, it's something you need to build a bit of a thicker skin around. I think it's something that comes with time. But we've had a look at a few different, you know, team structures, ways of explaining team development. The obvious goal is to achieve high performance teams, which is, I think, an admirable quality. If we all have to work in teams, we'd rather work in a high performance environment than a dysfunctional environment in our teams. And we can actually achieve, in terms of conflict, you know, if it's positive, it can lead to better outcomes, and, you know, possibly to better forms of collaboration and working together. But everyone needs to have a voice, and everyone has to be represented in that. Okay, I'm going to leave it here. I'll stop sharing. We'll come back to this slide because the next section of the lecture is on innovation. I'm sure you would like to go and do a few things now before you look at the next part. Thanks for being here with me today, and I will see you in the next part. Take care. Have a good day.